Good morning, Dickinson, and welcome back to the CSSJ podcast. I'm Leslie Mazzeno, CSSJ student intern and resident procrastinator. Don't worry, Dr. Van, I'll totally get you my thesis work by tomorrow.
And I, of course, am Jonah Lenahan, CSSJ student intern and resident Oscar the Grouch fanboy. Favorite color? Green. Favorite word? Scram. Living space? Pretty trashy.
Jonah, we've had a lot of difficulty getting this podcast together this week. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think there's been a number of bumps in the road with this one. I feel like the scripting process did not go particularly well. Figuring out who was going to fulfill what role in this episode didn't go particularly well. I know that a highlight for me was on our first recording attempt, which this is not. I got to watch the two of you, goobers, eating your breakfast at 1 p.m. in Bosler Hall, which was a great experience. Look, when you get up at 10,
that's perfectly reasonable time to eat breakfast.
I would have gotten up way later if I could have today.
You guys are just self-incriminating further, first of all, by admitting that you got up at 10, and Molly, by admitting that this is our second recording on the same day.
Yeah, well, so is life.
Molly, what was your favorite part of this morning?
I would say my favorite part of this morning is when I got all the way to the radio station and I had forgotten to check my phone and saw that we were now going to be podcasting in a secondary location.
So today we are going to be joined by Professor Mireille Rebeiz of the French and Francophone Department, the Women, Gender, and Sexuality Department, and the Middle East Studies Department for an interview that will be wide-ranging and very fun. I'm looking forward to it. We're also going to talk with Molly a little bit here about Religiously Redefining, a group that she began for students who are still parsing out and searching their religious, secular, and spiritual identities on campus.
Yay! But first, Molly, our correspondent piece. Take it away.
Tonight at 6:30, CEAS will host a conversation about bees and beekeeping in Kaufman Room 178. Some people, like me, are not afraid of bees. You know what? You sting me, you get stung. On February 21st, Oscar-nominated screenwriter Nick Hornby will be in Allison Hall to give a public reading from his book and receive the Stelfox Award from President Jones. Jonah, you should go meet this guy. He could give you some pointers.
Molly, this is where you have me all wrong. I'd never want to be a screenwriter. As my grandfather always says, I have a face for radio. It would be a sin to squander that in video format.
Nobody was asking you to be on screen, silly. That's my job. You can write in a conference room somewhere. And it can do the lights and sound, and Leslie can direct.
I don't want to direct. That's a lot of pressure.
I thought you'd say that, which is why I'm also the director. You can make coffee.
Okay, now I'm very curious, what would Cody do?
Executive producer. He basically just goes to meetings with fancy people and promotes us and then shows up at the end to read a prepared statement.
Molly, that's ridiculous, and I don't want to hear anymore. We would never assign a role to somebody as special as director Cody Nielsen. Now, could you please finish your segment so we can move on to the interview?
Sure. The Clark Forum will host a talk by Dr. Eddie Glaude on the ethics of anti-racism on Thursday at 7 p.m. Dr. Glaude says that eliminating racism takes a lot more than checking off boxes on an agenda. That's a shame for you, Leslie, because checkboxes are the only thing providing structure in your universe.
Molly, it turns out that if there's no God to order your life, you start getting really into genealogy, medieval agriculture-based PC games, and checklists. 2 of those 3 things are what keeps this office going, so I'd appreciate a little respect.
That may be so, Leslie, but in order to keep this episode going, we do really need to get to my interview. Mireille is anxiously waiting.
Who's Mireille?
Mireille Rebeiz, the professor we're interviewing.
Since when are you on a first-name basis with professors, Jonah? You call Cody Professor Nielsen for the first 6 months that you knew him, and that's Cody. Professor Rebeiz is downright impressive.
That she is. You're so right, Leslie. To see how right you are, let's get to our interview. For today's interview, we are joined by Professor Mireille Rebeiz of the WGSS, French and Francophone Studies, and Middle East Studies departments. Mireille, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's exciting to be here.
I'm very excited to have you on. I've now known you since early on in my freshman year when I started coming to OCF Bible study with Father Ted. But I don't think we ever had a lot of one-on-one conversations until more recently. But it's been really cool to hear your insights every Saturday. You love to poke the bear a little bit. You like to talk
Ted.
back.
Yeah, Father Ted.
Yeah, so I'm very excited that you're here with us today.
Thank you for the invitation. I'm excited to be here.
I wanted to start by asking you just a little bit about your own religious identity. This is something we like to do in pretty much every interview on the podcast. Obviously, I know that you're an Orthodox Christian, but would you like to elaborate on that Where does that come from for you?
I don't know if I can take any credit for it because I was born in it, right? Like I come from a family that is Orthodox, has been Orthodox. If you trace my family tree back in Lebanon from the 1700s, I come from a family that has been Orthodox for a long, long, long time. Yeah. I mean, we do have religious diversity in the family, but mainly it remains very Orthodox. So today I still identify as Antiochian Orthodox, but it wasn't the case all the time growing up. There was a time in my life where I stopped believing in God, and then I came back to rediscover God. And so there was a journey of discovery, basically. But yes, I do identify as Antiochian Orthodox. And again, I don't think I can take credit for it. I was born in that culture. I was born with family that practices that faith, these religious practices. So am I 100% convinced in it? Absolutely. Are there doubts every now and then? Absolutely. Yeah. But I think that's the work of faith, right? Like you're never 100% in. You're always doubting, thinking, and rethinking.
I love the language you used of not taking credit for your faith, right? Like it's not something that you achieved, and I think Father Ted had a similar idea. He talked about being born into, in his case, an Italian Catholic family, but then also going through a period of struggle. When was that period for you, and how did family help to root you in your faith?
That's a very good question. First, I don't take credit for it because I don't think any of us have chosen. You're not born choosing your religion. If one has a religion,
it's not like a vending machine.
No, right? Like, and it's not. And as a matter of fact, I have a lot of respect for people who choose their faith and choose what religion they want to follow, because it's really a homework, right? Like it's a conviction. You do the homework. But for me, when I fell out of religion, so I grew up in the Civil War in Lebanon. And for a long time, I kept thinking, like, okay, if all these people are killing each other over religion, then what is God? If this is really what God wants? Because keep in mind, when you're thinking of religious wars, people tend to think that they're talking to God, or that God is talking to them, or there's this appropriation.
God is on their side.
God is on their side, exactly. So I went through a phase of high school going through college. I went through a phase where I'm like, well, if that's God, I don't want him or her, whatever it was, right? So I would even say I hated him. Because in my mind, if there was a war, it's because of him. And I didn't want to go to church. I didn't want to go to and celebrate religious events. And then, my mom kind of like, she didn't dismiss me, but she kind of thought that, it's the phase of college and so on, which it's funny because I see it sometimes in my college students and I feel I'm thinking like my mom. I'm becoming my mom. But actually, it was my dad who helped me because both my parents are religious. They practiced orthodoxy, but they're very personally and conservative on themselves, never on others. It's a personal task. It's assignments on the self, on the body, never on others. They never kind of pushed me to like, no, you have to go to church or anything. But, my dad had a prayer corner at home, and every morning he would light his candle. We have iconography, right, in Orthodox Church. So we have icons, we have the cross. He would light his little candle, say his little prayer, and then look at me and then kiss me so I can go to school, whatever I had to do, and no judgment. And then till one day, he got me a book by a Lebanese-American author named Khalil Gibran, who's the famous author of The Prophet, the book The Prophet. So he got me actually the whole series of that author. And one of the books was Jesus, Son of Man. And it's a philosophy, right? Like it's philosophy. It's not religious. And then it kind of reintroduced me to this idea of faith as a philosophical approach to something above us, higher than us. And this was my re-entry. He tricked me. So
it was sounds like maybe he tricked you a little bit.
He tricked me. But so that's how I reconnected. But it was for a while, it was just spirituality and philosophical, that there's something above us, and that if the war happened, what about free will? If wars happen and ugliness happiness, because people choose that, not because God is evil. And so from that philosophical aspect, I gradually started going back. And now I have a son. I find myself with the struggle. I'm like, you have to go to church on Sunday. I'm like, I don't know how to duplicate what my parents did. But yeah, I'm trying to lead by example rather than by ordering him around.
Yeah, I know that as a little kid, for me, I always enjoyed going to church, but I'm sure it was stressful for my mom to get the three boys going, especially with my dad, officiating at service. So I am curious to hear how it is that you have continued to engage in discourse with other people of faith, especially people who maybe didn't go through the kind of discernment process that you did, right? Like where you fell away and you needed time to think about, why does God allow bad things to happen? You know, these big questions that a lot of students think about. How do you talk to other people of faith who maybe haven't gone through that yet?
I would answer this in two ways. One, for people who are struggling, I do not see myself as a teacher of religion. There is humility in it, right? Like when I look at you or some of our fellow, what do you call them? Like those of us who attend the Bible studies, right? Yeah. The fellow colleagues, it's not colleagues, but I'm humbled by how well you know your Bible. I'm not there. And so therefore, I would never claim to be someone who can teach or bring someone back or challenge. That's not my role. But also, not only I'm always thinking that my religious faith is somehow, there's a deficit in it, right? But also my education in it. What I'm trying to say is like, yes, I am educated. I know my Bible.
Sure.
I know, but I always feel like it's not my place. It's not my place to tell how people should feel about faith or whatever. I'm happy to talk to people who approach me, but I also believe that personal journey matters, because no matter what I tell someone, if they're struggling about whether God exists or not, no matter what I tell them, they have to find that on their own, in their own discovery. There's no amount of verses I can say, no amount of look at me, no amount of sharing personal stories is going to help. I think we all have our own journeys to go through. There's definitely personal homework that goes in that, because it's like you're seeking something, whatever that something is. If you're not seeking it at all, maybe a gentle push, you can offer an option of religion, but I would never presume to be the one saying you need to do this or that. That's not my place.
Yeah, I'm very impressed by your humility, which I know kind of can create contradiction, right? When you go in a circle of, being humbled and trying to be humble. But I do want to talk a little bit about the place where you are, in fact, very well educated, the subjects that you teach here at Dickinson. How did you find yourself teaching simultaneously in 3 departments? And what's that like for you? I mean, the shift has to be, crazy for you going from class to class.
Wow. I mean, thank you for asking. I hope you understand that this is not just, there are a couple of faculty who do that too. And I think this is the beauty of interdisciplinarity at Dickinson, where you don't just belong to a specific niche or a specific just a square where you're put in, right? I had the image of a cat in a box. I'm like, you're a cat, you're sitting in your box, and that's it, right? Honestly, I can be that cat in a box, and it's very comfortable too. But the beauty of Dickinson is that we have that option of teaching interdisciplinary matters, and college values this education, but also it gives us the space for it, right? Like someone like me who has different world experiences, languages, topics, it was not hard to approach the college and say, I'm interested in doing this and this, and they thought it's phenomenal. Now, is it hard? Yes, it is hard. Just think about logistics, right? Scheduling, running from a building to another, different subject matters, sometimes language, you're teaching in different languages. It is definitely hard to juggle, but I wouldn't want to be that cat in one box. That's not who I am also. It's also personal fulfillment, right? Like when you're teaching subjects that matter to you, you go in a classroom, your heart is in it, so...
I think students really appreciate having a professor who jumps around. It does provide your classroom experience with a little bit more depth, right? If you know your professor isn't only focused on studying the Middle East all the time, but also has other academic pursuits and disciplines, like that makes you want to question more, that makes you want to interrogate more and learn more, that maybe expands the realm of the class if you know that the professor you're with has broader knowledge. How have you found the interplay to be between, for example, like WGSS and Middle East Studies? Do you find yourself, while teaching a Middle East Studies class, thinking a lot through a women and gender lens?
I can choose to teach the Middle East from different angles. Like, I can choose to teach the Middle East from a legal point of view. I can teach, for instance, a course on indigenous rights in the Middle East, or I'm thinking particularly, for instance, in Algeria, North Africa. So point being, the Middle East can be approached from different angles. angles. For me, when I teach the Middle East, I choose to overlap two lenses, right? Like women of the Middle East. So there is the aspect of the history of feminism, of Arab women and Muslim women, religious minority women in that region. But also it's intersectionality, right? Like there's the identity, there's race, there's ethnicity, there's religion, there's geographical. So it's all intersect for me. And honestly, it's not no-brainer. When you come from these spaces yourself, it's no-brainer to think in an intersectional way and to make these connections between both. Now, again, to go back to your earlier question, the hardest part for me is more the logistics of all of this. The easiest part and the part that I enjoy the most is actually the classroom. I love classrooms that are intersectional and cross-listed, and students come from different disciplines, majoring in different things, or first year. But I think the things that happen behind the scenes are the most... I feel so bad for those who are helping us cross-list our classes, because just like the amount of emails that go between, the departments to cross-list the courses, that is the time-consuming part for administrators and for faculty. But otherwise, I just love it. It's just awesome.
I love to see a professor enjoying teaching. I notice this a lot with Professor Shadler. You're getting a shout-out, Professor Shadler. Where we'll be in class and he's given a lecture and he just seems so excited about the subject material. And it's a lot of professors, but
I think he's excited about everything in life. Hi, Peter. We love you a lot. So.
Yeah, we know you'll listen to this a couple weeks after it comes out.
But no, I know what you mean. I mean, I used to be a student myself, and I know that the best classes were the classes where I connected with the professor, where there was passion, where you could tell there is a heart in there. It's not just like their person is doing their job, but they're going above and beyond. And I've wanted to mimic that model in my classrooms, and I'm happy to see that students notice.
I think that I had a really good question. It just floated away, Mireille. Just floated away.
But I just want to go back to something you mentioned earlier to me about connecting with other people from other religion. We have 18 religious communities in Lebanon. In a very small space, you don't have a majority of anything. And so that automatically teaches you to respect other people's religious traditions, faith, whatever they're wearing, what they eat. Because, religion is not just praying. It's also how you interact with the world. You talked about humility. I just want to mention that it's also very much a value that is taught in the Middle East. I know it sounds that people are killing each other all the time in the Middle East, but it's not true, because there are times where we actually like each other.
I think that's really good to hear.
Yeah,
a message
thank
that
you.
Maybe doesn't get heard very often.
Thank you.
I do think, though, there's been a lot of difficult conversations to happen over the past year, but always. I know that you're somebody in Bible study, in conversation about anything, who has strong opinions. I know you're also somebody who is very dedicated to your academic discipline, clearly, right? And you want to teach in a way that helps students to learn on whatever journey they're on. Have you found it difficult to communicate things like intersectionality and the reality of actual life in the Middle East over the past, 6-9 months? Or has your background prepared you well to communicate some of those things?
Okay, so a couple of thoughts here. One, Dickinson students tend to be on the liberal end. I'm not talking politically. I'm talking about tolerance and acceptance. There is this tendency to listen and accept or challenge, but not to be offended right away, right? Yeah. There is that tendency at Dickinson. I've seen it in a couple of classes where some students, get offended right away. But even in that moment of being flustered or upset, there is still willingness to listen. And I think this is something very typical. This is maybe something very typical to us here at Dickinson or the student body. I don't know, but there's something charming about it that you can actually have these conversations. Now, have these conversations gotten harder over the year? Yes, I'll tell you why. The conversation is becoming, a little bit harder, is because sometimes I feel that the reality that we live as students or as Dickinsonians is a little bit disconnected from realities that are in the international world or in the, outside the United States. And I don't want to discredit the student experience, but also I feel like it's my job to tell them that this is not how sometimes the world functions. But at the same time, again, it's not my place. These are things that are learned through experience and personal journey and so on. So to go back to your original question, no, it is not like absolutely hard. It's not an insurmountable task, but it's becoming harder and harder, especially that there are times there's a little bit of naivety, there's times a little bit of overreaction, but still the conversation can happen. Now, there's a definite climate change after the horrible attacks of October 7 and, the ongoing war between Palestine and Israel and, what's happening in Gaza. And this is where truly you ask yourself, as a Middle Eastern woman of a religious minority, every day I ask myself, what's my role in this world? And how can my faith help me navigate these situations? And I think the important thing to remember in all of these hard conversations, it's always, always good to remember that we must lead with our heart and humanity. And honestly, I try really hard to think of whoever is on an opposing end. I try to listen with my heart. It's easy to react. It's easy to be angry. It's easy to get inflamed right away. It's also harder to train these emotions to calm down, right? But this is where, again, you asked me earlier what role my faith plays in my life. Yeah. This is really a role. It's like, how do you navigate this hard conversation where you have people of different religion fighting and you have civilians caught in the middle and you have children dying and you have injustice on both ends? And how do you navigate that? Do I have an answer to it? No. Am I willing to listen? Absolutely. And I just try to have this conversation with an open heart. I know it sounds cheesy, but I really mean it. I really mean it.
And that's how you know it's not cheesy, right? That you mean it. Well, Mireille, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
It's been a wonderful conversation.
Thank you.
I learned so much, and I'm very excited to see you at Bible study on
Thank
Saturday.
you. We'll see you Saturday.
Well, the newsletter review has once again arrived. It's been a while since I did one. I am very excited, and I'm especially excited, Leslie and Molly, and audience, because this week I was given license to do a little musical geek out. This week's newsletter article, written by Leslie Mazzeno, explored Leslie's relationship to the undisputed musical goddess / actual goddess of our time, whose name lingers on the heart and mind of every man, woman, and child in America. If I'm honest, I would never have predicted this connection from you, Leslie, but it does make you so much more relatable to our audience. You're turning 22, and you wanted to talk about Taylor. I get that. I'm not yet 20. I've got a little ways to go before the song hits me like it hit you this week. But Taylor is also a big part of my life, and I want to explore that. And by Taylor, I of course mean James Taylor. Singer-songwriter of legendary acclaim, Grammy winner, icon of American folk and soft rock from 1970 to today, the first American signed to the Beatles' Apple Records. The namesake, yes, I'm not kidding, of Taylor Swift, with whom he once performed his classic song, Fire and Rain, at Madison Square Garden. It's true, look it up. James Taylor is my favorite musician of all time, ever. That's why I get to use his first name. I saw him in concert in 2021. My favorite era of James Taylor? Wow, that's a difficult question. I mean, everybody would say Sweet Baby James era. That's my dad's favorite. What with songs like Country Road, Sunny Skies, Steamroller, Blossom. Contemplative, but sweet and gentle. A man who's been through a lot in only a few years of adulthood. Mudslide Slim, I'm also a big fan of. That's a great album. It feels like a road trip at night to me. And every song is like the musing of a weary traveler, long ago and far away. You can close your eyes. The Gorilla era from the mid-1970s is a real shift. Suddenly, James can't decide if he's an upbeat soft pop singer like on Mexico, or a proud young father like on Sarah Maria, or maybe someone who's still as lost as ever, like on Wandering. Every one of those songs captures a moment of pure emotion. Even confused, James isn't dishonest, and the title track proves he can still have fun. The 70s were a creative period for James Taylor, but it was 2 decades later that he found himself reflecting and recuperating on the album Hourglass. Songs like Another Day show a longing to wake up and get your shoes on, to keep moving forward. Little More Time With You brings joy back to the music with its laughing harmonica and relaxed drum beat. He ponders family and his past on Jump Up Behind Me and Enough to Be On Your Way. He marvels at the earth in Gaia. He rebuilds his messy life on the starting song, Line 'Em Up. But in a career which spans 55 years, there are so many great periods of Taylor's music to explore. October Road, which sounds like it's written by a man with the wisdom and age of a grandfather, but the giddiness and affection of a much younger guy, pulls at my heart with songs like September Grass and Caroline I See You, which I still maintain is one of the best disguised love songs ever set to guitar and orchestra. He's confessional on Mean Old Man and Carry Me On My Way. This might actually be my favorite album. It does have one of my favorite songs of all time, My Traveling Star. And finally, Before This World, James's last original album from 2015, is the perfect soundtrack to any family vacation. Songs for driving like Today, 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 Montana and Snowtime are among the coziest tunes I know. You and I Again is the love song everybody wants to be able to sing in their old age. Leslie, I did this because I thought it would be silly for me to go off on a wacky tangent about a musician my grandparents' age who started recording songs before my parents were born and who happens to share a name with the biggest pop culture idol of this century. But it turns out, after going through my own little Eras tour with my favorite musician, I've come to a much more sincere and serious place. To have music that can take you by the hand and guide you in whatever direction you need to be guided, especially at all the junctures in your life, is a special thing. James Taylor does that for me. I think Taylor Swift does that for a lot of people, you included, and I'm grateful that she does. It's a human need. As James wrote 50 years ago, the secret of life is enjoying the passage of time. You've got this, Leslie. Any fool can do it. There ain't nothing to it. Well, she never left, but we are joined now by CSSJ student worker and podcast correspondent Molly Louise Gunn.
Hi.
Molly, how are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
I am doing just fine, all things considered. I'm so glad you're here because it is time for us to talk about a space that you worked very hard to create on campus that is coming back. This is a group called Religiously Redefining, and I want you to explore for us what that means, what it meant for you to start it.
Yeah, sure. So I started Religiously Redefining a few semesters ago in 2022, and I saw that there was a need on campus not only for organized religions, but for people who are also sort of deciding to explore their religious identity in college. For a lot of us, one way or another, college is a big time to challenge our views and to maybe adopt some new views, and I think it's really important to be able to do that with other people going through the same thing.
When you participated in that group, Molly, what kind of viewpoints did you hear a lot from? I mean, what viewpoint are you coming from? And then also, what were other students saying to you that you connected with?
We had a really good turnout full of people from very diverse religious backgrounds. Me, myself, I come from a mixed faith household. My mom is Christian and my dad's Jewish. We had a few other half-Jews like me. We had pagan representation, Buddhist representation, Christian representation. At one point, we had Muslim representation as well. And it was really cool to see where we all differed in our points of view, but then also where we all came together.
Now, I understand that this group is starting back up again, but under different leadership. Could you tell us a little bit about how this re-kickoff of Religiously Redefining, this redefinition is happening, and who we should look to for leadership?
Absolutely, yes. I'm very excited to talk about this. So, as a second semester senior myself, I don't necessarily have the bandwidth to start Religiously Redefining, and accordingly, I've sort of passed the torch to Ezra Soncrant. She's going to be taking it over for me, and she's a religion major. She's excited to get started. We've been in contact regarding materials, topics that we'll be discussing, activities that we can do, and I know she's going to do a great job.
So, Molly, who all is invited to Religiously Redefining? Is it only students who are sort of searching their identities, agnostic students, or is it anybody from anywhere?
Definitely not. Everybody is invited. This is me personally inviting each and every one of you listening, and even people who aren't listening, to come to Religiously Redefining. That should be up and running in the next few weeks, definitely. And even if you don't necessarily feel like you need to have your viewpoints challenged, I think it can be really helpful to do that. Even if you think you're sure in something, it can actually, a lot of people look to challenging your viewpoints as something that can weaken your faith, but on the contrary, I think it can actually strengthen things and help to have a more robust worldview.
We actually just spoke to Professor Rebeiz about a very similar idea, right? She had to go through her own process of faith formation and even a period of time where she stepped away from organized religion to reconsider some things. And that's important for all of us to do. So, Molly, I might just take you up on your offer, and I can't wait to hear where Religiously Redefining goes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much again to Professor Rebeiz and to Molly. As an office that supports students of all religious, secular, and spiritual identities, it's very important to us to create space for reflection and conversation.
I agree.
As do I.
Anyhow, it's been a wonderful episode. I've enjoyed every moment speaking with Professor Rebeiz and with my dear friend and correspondent, Molly Gunn. Next time, we'll be joined by Antonia Benson for a wide-ranging interview about her experience as someone who not only studies religion, but is also a person of deep and profound faith who is looking towards going into ministry.
We've got an absolutely packed semester of this podcast for you, and we cannot wait to share the rest of our interviews with you. Thank you so much, as always, for listening, and we can't wait to see you in 2 weeks.
Happy Tuesday, Dickinson.
This episode of the CSSJ podcast is brought to you by Leslie, the only atheist fasting for Lent, Mazzeno's Morning Rage. Special thanks to Professor Rebeiz for a charming interview, and to Jonah, Saturdays or for the Bible, Lenahan, for his questions and all the pauses Leslie had to cut. We're also thankful for Molly passing the baton, Gunn, for her efforts to create new communities here after graduation while maintaining her own sanity. February, the fastest month of the year, is almost over. Grab onto something, people, or you just might fall off.
Hey, Cody, I have a question.
Yeah.
How do you think the partial gravity on Mars would affect you?
Oh, I think I probably would just start jumping like a bunny everywhere.
I'm really scared that you had an answer for that.